Hello, dear ones. I'm Anna, I'm 42 years old, and today I need to share with you something that happened 3 weeks ago and still keeps me awake at night. You know when life puts you in a situation where a simple gesture can change everything? Where an innocent touch awakens something you didn't even know still existed inside you? If you've been through something similar, leave your comment below. Your story might help other women who, like me, feel lost between what they feel and what they believe is right. He just touched my waist with his fingers, and suddenly, at 42, I discovered I could still feel like a teenager again. It was an ordinary Friday in March when I received Edward's invitation to dinner at his house. Nothing special, I thought at the time. We had been friends for 2 years, since I moved to apartment 804 in our building. He lived in 902, and our encounters were limited to polite greetings in the elevator and quick conversations in the lobby. Edward had always been a kind neighbor, one of those who holds the elevator even when they're in a hurry and sincerely asks if everything is okay when they notice something isn't quite right. There was a natural elegance about him, at 48, that drew attention without being pretentious. My marriage had ended a year and a half ago. 20 years of matrimony that dissolved like sugar in the rain, leaving only the sweetness of memory and the bitter reality of starting over. I was rebuilding my life brick by brick, learning to be Anna again, no longer Roberto's wife or Julia's mother. It was a painful and liberating process at the same time. Edward seemed to understand this transition without me having to explain the sordid details of my divorce. Perhaps having gone through the grief of losing his wife 3 years earlier, he recognized in me the grief of someone who had lost herself. I accepted the invitation with the natural of someone visiting a friend. There were no hidden intentions, at least not conscious ones. I chose simple but pretty clothes, a navy blue blouse that highlighted my eyes, and jeans that made me comfortable. It wasn't a romantic date, or at least that's what I kept telling myself while applying a bit more mascara and spritzing my favorite perfume. Going up only 4 floors in the elevator, but I felt a strange anxiety, like going to a first appointment with a new doctor. I had no idea that night would completely change my perception of myself and what was still possible to feel. The door to apartment 902 opened, revealing Edward with a warm smile and a kitchen apron that made him look even more charming. His house had the unmistakable aroma of fresh spices and red wine, a combination that immediately made me feel at home. The walls were decorated with travel photographs and paintings that showed good taste without ostentation. There was a table set for 2 in the center of the dining room with lit candles and cloth napkins. Edward had made an effort to create a special atmosphere, and this touched me deeply. It was comforting to know that there were still men who cared about these details, who understood that a dinner between friends also deserved care and attention. Edward cooked with the same delicacy with which he did everything in life: measured gestures, attention to small details that make the difference. While he finished the shrimp risotto, we talked about books we had read recently, trips we would like to take when life allowed, about how strange and challenging it is to start over after 40. There was a silent complicity between us, as if we shared intimate secrets without ever having revealed them verbally. He offered me a glass of chilled white wine, and when our fingers briefly touched as I took the glass, I felt a small shiver that I attributed to the air conditioning being on. During dinner, I noticed how his brown eyes lit up when he talked about his twin daughters who lived with their maternal grandmother, how his expressive hands told stories without needing words. There was a genuinely attractive maturity in him, a quiet confidence that younger men rarely possess. Edward wasn't trying to impress with professional achievements or material possessions. He was simply authentic. He spoke of his vulnerabilities with the same naturalness with which he spoke of his joys. He told me about the sleepless nights after his wife's death, about how he learned to cook by watching YouTube videos because she had always been the family's chef. The wine made us more relaxed, more willing to emotional intimacy. Our conversations flowed as if we had known each other for decades, not just 2 years of polite greetings. He told me about his fear of never being able to love someone the way he loved his wife. And I shared my insecurity about starting over at 42, about feeling obsolete in the romantic market. "Anna," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "you have no idea how special you are." These simple words had a profound impact on me. When was the last time someone had really seen me, beyond the roles I played? When he suggested we listen to music in the living room, I accepted without hesitation, not realizing I was about to cross an invisible line. The living room was cozy, with a brown leather sofa and a bookshelf full of books that revealed a cultured and interesting man. Edward put on a smooth jazz playlist, one of those songs that invite closeness without being too obvious. We settled on the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance, but I could feel the warmth emanating from his body. The conversation continued to flow naturally, interspersed with moments of comfortable silence, where only the music filled the space between us. He offered me more wine, and I accepted, feeling more relaxed than I had felt in months. It was as if, in his presence, I could lower all the guards I had kept up since the divorce. It was when Edward got up to serve more wine that it happened. A simple, ordinary gesture that would change everything between us. He approached the sofa where I was sitting, bottle in hand, gentle smile on his lips. When he leaned slightly to reach my glass, his fingers lightly brushed my waist. It was a touch that lasted only 2 or 3 seconds, but reverberated through every cell of my body like an electric wave. It wasn't intentional, I'm absolutely sure of that. Edward is too much of a gentleman to do something calculated or inappropriate. But the electricity of that seemingly innocent moment made me question everything I believed about myself, about my capacity to feel and be desired again. What shocked me wasn't just the intensity of the physical sensation, but the sudden awareness that I had spent so much time disconnected from my own body. During the last years of my marriage, I had become a functional version of myself, mother, wife, professional, but never simply a woman. Edward's casual touch on my waist brutally reminded me that I was still a being of flesh and blood, with desires and needs that had been buried under layers of responsibilities and disappointments. I thought this capacity to awaken had died along with my marriage, that at 42, with wrinkles beginning to mark the corners of my eyes and a body that was no longer the same as in youth, I had forever lost the right to feel desirable. My body's reaction was immediate and uncontrollable. I felt my heart race, a wave of heat rise up my neck to reach my face, which certainly blushed. My hands trembled slightly when I took the wine glass he offered me. It was as if a dormant part of me had suddenly awakened, like a person who wakes from deep sleep and needs a few seconds to remember where they are. Edward noticed my reaction, obviously. His eyes met mine, and for a moment that seemed infinite, we stayed like that, in silence, recognizing that something fundamental had changed between us. The air in the room became charged with a tension that wasn't there a few minutes before. Along with this sensory rediscovery came guilt, confusion, fear of misinterpreting a completely innocent gesture. Am I going crazy? I thought. Am I so emotionally needy that any masculine touch awakens me this way? The rational mind fought against the body's sensations, creating an internal whirlwind that left me torn between the desire to get closer to him and the urge to run to the safety of my apartment. Edward remained there, standing beside me, and I could feel that he too was processing what had happened. There was a palpable energy in the air, an electric current that connected our bodies even without other physical contact. Edward didn't immediately move away. His brown eyes seemed to ask the same question that echoed insistently in my mind. And now, what do we do with this that just happened between us? The tension was palpable, but respectful. Edward is one of those rare men who understands that some moments are too sacred to be rushed, that true desire is not in a hurry, and that genuine intimacy is built with patience and care. After what seemed like an eternity, he gently stepped back, placed the wine bottle on the coffee table, and offered me a tender smile, full of understanding. "Anna," he said with his deep, calming voice, "you are much stronger and more special than you imagine." Those simple words completely disarmed me. It wasn't just about physical attraction or sexual chemistry, it was about deep recognition, about being seen as a complete and complex woman again. Edward had perceived my vulnerability, and instead of taking advantage of it, chose to reassure and strengthen me. In that moment, I understood that he wasn't just an attractive man, but someone with rare emotional intelligence, capable of navigating delicate situations with grace and maturity. I felt tears forming in my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief and gratitude. How long had it been since someone looked at me that way? How long since someone saw something in me beyond my social functions? The rest of the night unfolded at a different pace, as if both of us were aware that we had crossed an invisible line and now needed to carefully navigate this new territory. We talked a bit more, but there was a new layer of intimacy in our words, as if each sentence carried a subtext that wasn't there before. Edward told me about the loneliness of weekends, about how sometimes he talked to himself just to hear a human voice at home. I shared my fears about the future, about the possibility of spending the rest of my life alone. These weren't superficial courtesy conversations. They were intimate confessions between two people who suddenly recognized each other as compatible souls. When I decided it was time to leave, Edward accompanied me to the door with characteristic gentleness, but there was something new in his gestures, a more intense attention to small details. He helped me put on my coat with extra care, making sure I was comfortable. In the farewell, we hugged, a hug that lasted a few seconds longer than would be appropriate between neighbor friends. I felt his masculine perfume, the firmness of his chest, the warmth of his hands on my back. When we separated, he gently held my face between his hands and said, "Thank you for such a special night, Anna. I hope we can repeat it soon." His eyes said much more than his words, and I knew that he knew that I understood the subliminal message. I went down only 4 floors in the elevator, but the trip seemed to last an eternity. My mind buzzed with contradictory thoughts and new sensations. I entered my apartment in a state of emotional shock, like someone who had just received news that changes everything. I went straight to the bathroom mirror and looked at myself for a long time, trying to find in my own eyes the woman that Edward had seen that night. My face was flushed, my eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen in years. Who is this woman? I asked my reflection. It seemed like I was recognizing myself for the first time in a long time, as if I had spent years living on autopilot and had finally awakened. That night, lying in my bed, I went over every moment of the evening repeatedly in my head. The touch of Edward's fingers on my waist had triggered a cascade of sensations and reflections that I couldn't control. I thought about how easy it had been for us to talk, how we understood each other without needing to explain much, how he looked at me with genuine interest and not just social politeness. I also thought about my fears. Would it be appropriate to get involved with a neighbor? And if it went wrong, how would it be to live in the same building? Would it be fair to myself to deny this connection out of fear of complications? Sleep took hours to come, and when I finally managed to fall asleep, I dreamed of gentle hands and deep looks. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Sometimes I felt like a teenager again, constantly checking my phone, expecting a message from him. Sometimes I felt ridiculous for acting like a teenager at 42. Edward maintained his characteristic elegance. He didn't bombard me with messages or try to rush anything. He sent an occasional good morning, asked how my day had been, shared an interesting photo or an article he thought I would like to read. They were subtle gestures, but they showed that I was in his thoughts. Each phone notification made my heart jump, and I found myself smiling alone at work when I received his messages. A week after dinner, we met by chance in the building's garage. I was coming back from work, tired and somewhat discouraged after a particularly difficult day at the office. Edward was arriving from the market, arms loaded with bags. When our eyes met, I felt again that electricity in the air, as if time stopped for a few seconds. "Anna," he said with a genuine smile, "good to see you. How are you?" It wasn't a casual courtesy question. He really wanted to know. We talked for a few minutes right there, between the parked cars, and once again, I was impressed by his ability to make me feel seen and heard. When we said goodbye, he lightly touched my arm and said, "If you need anything, you know where to find me." 2 weeks passed at a strange pace, where days seemed long, but weeks flew by. Edward and I developed a subtle routine of casual encounters, always polite, always respectful, but charged with an unspoken sexual tension that made the air thick between us. I realized I began to dress more carefully when leaving home, even to go to the market, in the secret hope of meeting him. I bought new clothes, changed my haircut, went back to wearing perfume daily. These weren't changes to impress him specifically, but changes to feel more connected to my femininity, which had awakened that dinner night. It was as if Edward had turned on a switch inside me that I didn't even know existed. It was then that he invited me for coffee at the corner bakery. Nothing pretentious, just, "How about we have coffee tomorrow afternoon?" I accepted, trying to sound casual, but inside I was panicking. What to wear for coffee with the neighbor who had awakened feelings I thought were dead? I opted for something simple but feminine, a midi skirt and a white blouse that made me comfortable but pretty. We arrived at the bakery almost at the same time, polite greeting, smiles that lasted a little longer than necessary. We chose a table in a more reserved corner, away from the street movement. Edward ordered espresso, I chose cappuccino. Small details that suddenly seemed to carry meaning. The conversation flowed naturally, as always happened between us. Edward told me about a new project at work. I shared some funny stories about my daughter who was starting college. But there was an emotional undercurrent in everything we said, as if each word was carefully chosen to communicate something beyond the obvious. At one point, he held my hand over the table. It was a simple gesture, almost fraternal, but it sent waves of heat up my entire arm. "Anna," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "I would very much like to get to know you better, really." These weren't ambiguous words. It was a clear declaration of intentions. I felt my face blush again, like a teenager receiving her first date invitation. My response came out in a whisper. "I would like that too, Edward." They were just words, but they represented a conscious choice to allow myself to feel again, to risk again, to believe that at 42, I still had the right to romantic happiness. He gently squeezed my hand and smiled in that way that made his eyes shine. "Then let's go slowly," he said. "No pressure, no unrealistic expectations. Just two adults who like each other, discovering how far this can go. That emotional maturity completely won me over. Edward wasn't promising the world or declaring eternal love. He was being realistic and honest about his intentions, and this made me trust him even more. We left the bakery as different people from those who had entered an hour before. We were no longer just neighbor friends. We were two people who had decided to explore a romantic connection with honesty and maturity. We walked slowly back to the building, our hands occasionally touching during conversation. In the elevator, we stood side by side in comfortable silence, and I could feel the sexual energy hovering between us, controlled but present. When we reached my floor, he accompanied me to the apartment door. "May I kiss you?" he asked with a gentleness that disarmed me. It wasn't a passionate or desperate kiss. It was a soft, exploratory kiss, full of unspoken promises. When we separated, both of us were smiling. Since then, Edward and I have begun a relationship that challenges all my previous conceptions about love and romance. It's not the overwhelming passion of 20, nor the predictable and safe love of a long marriage. It's something completely new. A mature love built on a solid foundation of friendship, mutual respect, and genuine attraction. We go out to dinner, go to the movies, take walks in the park. We talk about everything, our fears, our dreams, our past experiences. Edward makes me laugh in a way I had forgotten was possible. He really listens to me, doesn't just wait for his turn to speak. He sees me as a complete and complex person, not just as an available woman. The most surprising thing is how this relationship has changed my relationship with myself. I've gone back to looking at myself in the mirror with affection, gone back to taking care of my body, not out of obligation, but for pleasure. I buy beautiful lingerie because I feel sexy, not because I need to seduce someone. Edward awakened in me a sensuality that I thought I had lost forever. It's not just about physical attraction, although that certainly exists. It's about feeling alive again, connected to my feminine essence, confident in my ability to love and be loved. At 42, I discovered that the best of romantic life may still be to come, that maturity brings an emotional depth that youth doesn't know. Of course, not everything is roses. We have our insecurities and challenges. Sometimes I worry if I'm being naive, if I'm deluding myself with a relationship that may have no future. Edward still carries the pain of losing his wife, and I'm still processing the wounds of my divorce. We are two people with heavy baggage trying to build something new together. But maybe that's exactly what makes our connection so special. We're no longer young idealists thinking love conquers all. We're realistic adults who consciously choose to invest in each other, knowing that relationships require work, patience, and mutual commitment. And you, who are following me this far, have you gone through this late emotional rediscovery? Have you ever felt that a simple touch can awaken a version of you that had been asleep for years? Leave your comment, share your story, your doubt, your fear, or your hope. We are a community of women who understand that romantic life doesn't end at 40, that we can still surprise ourselves, that we still have much love to give and receive. No matter how many springs you've lived, there's always the possibility of a new season of the heart. Sometimes the deepest touch is the one that awakens our soul, not just our skin. See you in the next video with another story from the heart.